How many of you knew each other before you started this class?
A majority of each other. I think everyone kind of knows one or two other people.
One or two others?
Maybe not even that.
So I tend to look at things like from a systems point of view. So my goal is to change that. So I want to bring the whole food world closer together because I look at like what is the multiplier effect of collaboration. So with all the different things that each of you is doing, some of you may be doing things together. What would that look like? Or be doing similar things. What would it look like if you started collaborating? Or even if you're doing completely different things, what does that look like? So I'm, I guess, an entrepreneur. I wonder some days. I don't know. I've started, I think I'm on like company number 8. And one of the things Scott wanted me to share with you is, I guess maybe you can call it resilience, the ability to be willing to get back up and dust myself off after I have had a spectacular failure. And my favorite thing, my favorite startup that I started and crashed and burned was in food, in local food, about 3 years ago. Maybe a little more than that. I've been working, does anyone know the Chef's Garden in Huron, Ohio? So I did all the fundraising for Veggie U, the nonprofit arm of the Chef's Garden. So a lot of the microgreens that you see if you go to eat it, well, people are doing it now locally here, but before a couple years ago, if you were getting microgreens, chances are they were coming from the Chef's Garden. They have like a 300 or 400 acre sustainable farm halfway between here and Cleveland, and they produce microgreens and other like baby custom kind of boutique designer veggies, as I call them, and they sell to chefs all over the country. I think they were in about 39 states and a few countries around the world. So really interesting business model. And I have an MBA, so I've kind of gone on that path of like, well, how do I measure this? How do I know if I'm doing this right? And part of what had me crash and burn this startup a couple years ago was 2 things. One, I don't think we really knew what we were supposed to be measuring. And the second is we were speaking to the wrong customer. And we spent probably a little over a year. I have a business partner, and we spent, in the startup world, there's a thing called runway. That's how much money that you have available and how much you spend every month. So you divide that total amount of money divided by what you spend every month, and that's what your runway is. So we probably had maybe 8 months to maybe 10 months, and we went for like 14. So we were way past the runway when we realized we were going to be creating this app and a program that we thought we were selling to Bowling Green, and had met with the provost like 4 times, and he loved it. But then we got down into the weeds with a few people, and it just, it ended up like the last meeting, my business partner and I looked at each other and we went, oh my gosh, this isn't going to happen, is it? So it's kind of maybe a cautionary tale, maybe not, I don't know. I think if you guys are all, you all have a passion for growing local food, and especially PK was a great first person to go tonight, because it seems that we're all in that kind of like-minded, how do we do things locally in a way that matters. So what I'm doing now is called the Food Collaborative, and the Facebook page, it's like 2 weeks old. But what I'm looking to do, as Scott kind of mentioned, is kind of looking at the whole system of local food in our community. So you have a couple of chefs who buy from a couple of people like Scott. And so I want to make that world smaller. So if you look at like any one of you individually, and you say you're growing broccoli, well, you could probably meet like 1 day of demand for a balanced grill, right? But what if you partnered with other people in the region? What if you get some of the other farmers, like University Church and Benches and, I don't know, Ream, Produce, and you get them together, then you can start making a bigger difference. Because then what happens if you get 3 or 4 farms together and they can start supplying Balanced Grill and 1 or 2 other restaurants. And that's the multiplier effect of collaboration. Because it's not going to radically change the community overnight. And I don't know that we necessarily even want to. And I think you were saying, you put a post about the tomatoes and no one cared. So I've done a ton of public speaking. One of the things that I've learned along the way, speaking of, and I've learned this the painfully hard way, of speaking to someone who, like speaking to a room of people and having someone in the front row asleep. And focusing my efforts on how do I wake this person up without derailing what I'm doing. And what I learned the hard way is you want to speak to the people who are already a yes. So it's the same thing in local food as I see it. So you have a community of 15 or 20 people here. So this is the best place to start. And then start looking around at, okay, you have people like PK, great, add him to the mix. You have a couple other restaurants like Rob Campbell at Revolution Grill, like Chef Mike at Revolver, Chris Nixon at Element 112. So start looping those people in. And that's when you get to the multiplier effect. Because then all of a sudden, instead of saying, well, we had 3 people who responded that no one cares, you're already talking to the people who do care. And I think that is not lost on me at all. And like I said, a part of it is from decades of experience of trying to convince the people who don't care and realizing that you lose energy that way. So, does that make sense, what I'm saying? Okay. So, anyway, so for me, my personal goal, and really I think the goal of the Food Collaborative, is to change how people think about, relate to, and consume food. So this is not a shock to any of us here, but something magical happens when you have that relationship with the person who's producing your food, when you can look them in the eye and have this trust. And I had a great example of that with Scott and a local chef. We were having kind of a roundtable meeting of farmers, chefs, people with a lot of restaurants, not like the Olive Garden types, but local restaurants, a coffee shop or a couple coffee shops. So the goal was, all right, how do we get all the people on the supply side together at the same table? Mommy Valley Growers, there were a few other people there too. And I saw an exchange between Scott and one of the chefs because they were getting sidetracked on, well, we don't want this to be automated because, well, how am I gonna stop by and connect with you and have a beer with you if it's all automated? And that was really telling because I think I'm a big tech person. I just spent 3 years running the incubation program at University of Toledo. So I love technology and what it enables and provides for us. And that's one of the things I'm looking at now with the Food Collaborative is how do I have technology be the thing that actually brings us together and foster those relationships instead of the thing that makes it impersonal and pulls us apart. So I think technology is very useful that way. And really technology is in, like if you look around, everything in here has some component of technology to it. So, and that's not slowing down, it's not going to go away, probably not in our lifetime, probably not in our kids' lifetimes. And I don't know that we really want it to. So I kind of am a fan of lean into it. But by the same token, what PK said earlier is there's that upward momentum right now of people who want to grow their food locally. And I think the opportunity for all of you is to look way beyond yourselves. Like, what am I doing that's going to really impact the community, and how do I get there? And part of it is as simple as my favorite alliteration currently is clear, consistent, collaborative communication. So what are we doing to communicate with each other? One thing I will tell you is, in the history of time, there's never been a business that has been really, truly successful with one person. Like, it just, you can't do it by yourself. So the more that you can start to look at the resources that are out there, that is hugely valuable. And that's something that I see that the Food Collaborative, one of the things that I'm working on is, how do I build this network? How do I get people to the table? Because there are a lot of people, you're right, and I'm sorry, what is your name? You were talking about the tomatoes?
Jason.
Jason. One of the things that when Jason said, yeah, there are a lot of people, they could care less about local food. They don't care. And part of my journey was really being, well, let me interject. There's a phrase, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. And that's kind of how I got started, was with, I have twins and they're 13 now. And when they were tiny, a couple years old, and they started going to a co-op preschool. And it was like nirvana for me. It was awesome. They had their own, we grew things, the kids made things, it was great. And then they went to public school, and we were living in Southern California. And it was like that rude awakening of, I'm sorry, you're feeding what to my kids? And at the same time, I was in a Moms of Multiples club, and I had all these friends whose kids were starting to get diagnosed with global development delays, and autism, and Asperger's, and learning disabilities. And I mean, it was like at an alarming rate. Like, I just did surveys among like my friends that I knew, and started asking them, "What are you feeding your kids?" Well, like, I'll give them Sprite, but it's not caffeinated. And so I started looking at, like, well, what do you as a parent eat? What do your kids eat? And started really, that was my going down the rabbit hole of the impact that food has. And then it was the impact of real food, and then the impact of local food. So it's kind of ending up where you all are now. So the sum total of that is realizing that the more people I talked to, the more people had in common different situations, different experiences, whether it's, well, my kid has some issue, my child has difficulty learning, and here's what. Then it was kind of like the reverse engineering of it. Like, okay, so if you have a child with this issue, what happens if you start feeding them real food that you grow in your own garden? Well, there's that ownership, as we probably all know, that, if you grow something yourself and your kids, they're more likely, that ownership has them have a more vested interest in eating it. And that was something that we did with VeggieU, was the impact that growing your own food makes on, like, the people, planet, profit. The impact that it makes on your kids and their ability and their willingness to choose. And then also on the taste, and how does it taste, like that. So, let's see, I think I've talked to the multiplier effect. And I talked a little bit about the Food Collaborative. So I look at, like, what is our ecosystem here? What I see in the technology startup world is there's a ton of really cool ideas out there, and people don't know where to go. And what I've noticed is, it's the same in the food world, it's the same in the arts world. Although in the art world, here in Toledo, they have a pretty well-defined, does anyone ever go to, like, the Art Museum or the Arts Commission events or anything like that? So for those of you who do, you start to see the same people over and over again. They have a really cool community and environment. And in my travels, what I noticed is, well, why can't we do that in the food community? And so that inspired me to come up with this latest iteration, which is now the Food Collaborative, is what can we do to create a network that brings people together, so that, if you are at a level where PK is, where you're now into your third restaurant, and you've got, another restaurant that is on the horizon, what do you do about hiring good people? And how do you hire consistently good people? Well, I don't know that because I don't have a restaurant, but I know 50, 75, 100 people who do. So why not bring that network together and provide those resources and make them all readily available? So I bet if you all started going around the room and sharing what's missing for you, what do you need, what are your challenges, other people at this very table could start answering that for you. So I taught the first urban ag course for Owens before it was a brief shining moment of about 3 years when their program existed. But that was one of the things. We had 8 students, and at the end of the day, they realized, oh my gosh, we are the biggest assets for each other, because now I know about what your business is. I know about, whether it's broccoli. I know that you're looking to do that. Guess what? I just heard that there's a restaurant called Balance Grill. He's looking for local people. So the opportunity to kind of look at who you know, like right in front of you, or if you guys don't have the answer, I bet among the 15 or 20 of you, you know someone who does. So it's not that I'm fundamentally lazy, but I like to know, what are the shortcuts? How do I get from here to there in the most efficient way possible? And so that's the beauty of that, again, that kind of multiplier effect of working with each other and figuring out, what's the shortest way to get there? What are some of the things that you learned that didn't work in whatever it is that you're growing or doing in your business, that others have already been down that path, that you can maybe save 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. So part of what we did at UT, running the incubator, one of the things that I saw was missing was process. And so I stumbled on this program called the Business Model Canvas. And actually that's something that I highly recommend that you take a look at. It was originally created for technology-based startups, but now I've been teaching it at the Arts Commission. I'm helping the Turo School for the Arts. There are some students there that want to open a cafe, and they're using this model. And have any of you read the business plan?
What's the name of that one again?
Business Model Canvas. So a business plan, I'm not going to say it carefully. I'm just going to have at it. A business plan is completely mythical. And here's why. And now people are they bristle at that. But a business plan doesn't behave the way your consumer acts. So if you look at market research, it's completely made up, right? How do you know that, the numbers may be real for some business somewhere along the way, but that information is completely made up. How do you know that that has any relevance to what you're doing? I'm starting to see the eyes are the energy is kind of tanking a little bit, but don't worry, I'll pull it back up here. Not to fear. Here's the good news. The reason that you know that your business, your startup, your farm is going to be successful is by going out and finding out exactly who your customer is. It's called customer discovery. So some of this, if I had gone through this when, flashback to 3.5 years ago when I was working with BG, I would have saved myself a year of that runway that I told you about, that time, energy, money, and probably a lot of heartache of being so discouraged that it didn't work, and then being past the point where I could recover it. We just had to let it go, and it's like you watch it fall, like watching your favorite coffee mug fall on the floor and break into 1,000 pieces, and you can't put it back together. And it's it's really upsetting. And at the same time, it's gotten me now to the point where I'm okay, I'm ready to do this again and go for business number 9. But the beauty of it now is, I'm starting to do my customer discovery. So since January, I've talked to 147 people. And there are people like the Scotts of the world, like the chefs, like the suppliers. And I'm getting hugely valuable information because I get people who are telling me, oh, this needs to be political, like the Restaurant Association was. Well, I don't think so. I don't think that's the main purpose. And what I got to see out of all of this is that it validates that I'm on the right track. So my premise was we need a network in this region. We need a network. People don't know where they are. They think their business is like in a certain place and it's really over here. And so if you operate and you think your business is over here and you go down that path, imagine what it's like to get all the way down the end of the line and realize, oh my gosh, I went in the wrong direction. I'll give you a quick, horrible example. So there was a woman who was a great cook, and her friends loved her cooking, loved it. So everyone said, you need to have your own business. And enough people told her that she believed it and said, you're right, this is awesome, I should do this. Found a location that she got at a pretty decent price, went and basically leveraged everything she had to open this restaurant. She never made it to opening day. So she put everything she had into it because what she didn't do was find out that no one would go to that location. It was in the wrong part of town for what her customer base was, and she never talked to her customer base. Of course, your friends and family are going to tell you that they'll buy from you, but when you actually say pull out your checkbook, that's a very different story. So that's the beauty of customer discovery and finding that out. So the more people that you talk to, the better. So you want to take that passion of what you really, really love to do and channel that into, okay, now how do I do this in a way that's going to make money? That's really the bottom line of it. Because I had to really look at that business. I was in jewelry design for a few years, and I had to really have that moment of truth with myself and say, this is never going to be more than a hobby. I had people who would pay me, like one person was like, I have to have that necklace, I'll pay you $750 right now. And wrote me a check on the spot. And that happened several times. So the sex appeal of that was pretty compelling, right? Because it probably cost me $50 to make, maybe. So you look at that and it's like, wow, that's a pretty fantastic margin. I'm going to keep doing this. But then when you get to that point, it's like, is this going to be a hobby or is it a business? So that's something that, like being willing to have that conversation with yourself. So the good news is, once you start doing that customer discovery, and I'll tell you the first couple of times you do it, it's not doing a survey where you ask the exact same questions to everyone. You want to allow for that conversation. Much like I said earlier, when you're able to look that person in the eye that you're buying food from, whether it's at the farmer's market or whether someone's buying food from you, when you start to build that trust in that relationship, it's kind of the same conversation when you're doing customer discovery. When you're interviewing someone and you get to see their eyes widen and they start to lean forward, you can tell like you're engaging them and they're excited about it. Rather than interrupt that and say, okay, on to the next question, you want to see, so what is it? What is it about that when you had those three people, let's say you were having in-person conversations with those three people who said, oh my gosh, these tomatoes are fantastic. Well, tell me more about that. What is it that influences that? Like, what are your challenges? What is buying fresh tomatoes or whatever that is? You want to come up with that set of questions. So that's what I spent the last 3 years doing at UT, is really kind of honing that craft for teaching people about the business model canvas. And then it occurred to me when I started the Food Collaborative, like, hey, I should do this business model canvassing on the Food Collaborative. And oftentimes it validates, well, your goal is you want it to validate the premise of what you're doing. But the absolute beauty of customer discovery is when you have, this is your idea and this is what people are telling you. So what's that gap? And you gotta listen to them. Because sometimes, most of the time, almost all the time, you gotta listen to what your customer is telling you. Because if you ask people a question, they'll tell you everything you need to know about your own business. And so that's the kind of beauty of customer discovery, and then it's being willing to measure that. I know Scott will probably do a deeper dive into metrics as you go forward. but starting to track that. So as I went through and started doing this 147 customer discovery interviews, I didn't even know what I was measuring at first, but I started setting up my little Excel spreadsheet and tracking it. And then I started seeing, okay, so people want a network. People want a place where they can, like for coffee shops and restaurants, the hardest thing for them is finding consistent labor. So what happens if I could have a job board on this website that I'm going to be creating where they can talk to each other? And you have someone that you have 3 people and you have a 4th person that you want to hire, but either they're only available 10 hours or you only have 10 hours for them. Well, what if you could collaborate with another coffee shop or restaurant and fill in their hours? That would be pretty awesome. And that's something that just doesn't exist now. And maybe it's the same thing with hiring people to help you in farming or whatever your business is. So is this making sense? So the business model canvas is, you can find it everywhere online. And I've even modified it, so I can even send it to you if that would be useful for you. Because I modified it for the arts community because I realized, well, I understand what these tech-based businesses and when you're talking about market entry and channels and relationships, but probably people who haven't gone through this before are going to be like, what are you talking about? And then throw it away and never use it. So then it's like, good feeling gone. So I've modified it in a way that asks you some certain questions and you can start filling it in, and then there's a ton of information online. I don't know, do you guys have any questions at this point?
I'd like to elaborate on something.
Yeah, please do.
Again, that kind of firms up the importance of the cross-pollination, collaborating, working together, thinking of co-opetition instead of competition. Because in Northwest Ohio, we have this, we have a way greater demand than we have supply. But the reality is the supply is kind of there. It's just the communication of the supply through the demand. So the more that we can work together and round people's orders out and actually meet needs for restaurants, farmers markets, individuals, or however we want to do it, the stronger the economy will be, hip hip hooray, and all that stuff works out. But,
can I just say one thing on that?
Yeah.
So to look at it and say, well, the supply isn't there, is only part of the story. And that's where you have to look way beyond yourself. So, like when I started down this rabbit hole of local food, what I looked at is, I want to do something that I will probably never achieve in my lifetime. Like that's how big I'm playing in this. So it's changing, like creating a significant impact on how food gets done in our community. I don't know if that'll happen in my lifetime, but that's a big enough game for me to play. So as scary as that sounds, that's what I invite you to look at this from. If you say the supply is not there, well, look at it from a bigger angle of like, well, what's the demand? What's the gap? How do we come together to impact that? Because if you get all of us at the table and putting out into the world, oh my gosh, these tomatoes from the local farm that's supplying Churchill's are fantastic, then the tipping point is not actually where momentum happens. It's not at 50%. It's not even at 25%. It's not even at 15%. It's closer to 7 to 8%. That's when that multiplier effect starts to take place. That's pretty cool. Because I never knew that. It was, I think it's like, what's his name? Daniel Pink. He's written a couple of books like Blink. Anyway, so if you look at, it's called the tipping point. That's what the obvious. But if you start looking at that, that's actually great news. Because that means that we don't have to impact what 50% of the people in our community think. It's 7 or 8%. And that's when you start having real momentum. And it is so, so, so important. You don't have to give up anything to start collaborating and have, what did you say, coopetition? Yeah.
It's like one of my least favorite words to say because it sounds so non-profity.
It kind of does.
But it's a real thing.
It kind of does. But yeah. So be willing to look higher. Be willing to look at like what's this worth? Are you willing to do this as a hobby, or if you want to do this as a real business, what are you willing to do to make that happen?
I have a question. Good for what you said, and it's kind of good time to ask it. I've been trying to go around my own head too. Right now, you're saying we don't have enough to supply restaurants or there's more demand out there than supply. That's because 95% of people are going to farmers markets because that's where the price point is, right?
Right.
That's where you're going to have to get paid and have to make a living doing it. But like PK, like we've mentioned, 30% you're not going to get anywhere close to paying for what you've got to put into it. The half
Broccoli's a horrible example.
Yeah, well, but even
Understood.
broccoli,
but
if
even
you're
egg,
Yeah.
the restaurant, they're buying for about $1.25 or $1. That's $2 for production.
Right.
For a factory. So, yes, we can scale that up on a much larger scale and bring some of those costs down, but not to maintain that amount.
Well, that's why like I mentioned, there has to be the hand-in-hand thing that happens. As the production increases, the demand, the understanding of what the product is has to shift.
But at the same time,
in 3 or 4 restaurants in town right now who would pay up to $3.50 for a dozen eggs. And it's just a matter of we can communicate that and we can collaborate and work together and find a way to.
a lot of that
that's
is.
still going to be a preference for the leftover, right? I can't sell them from the taking over there.
Sure, you can get 5 at the farmer's market and then 350 all in 112.
If you look at going back to, I said my favorite alliteration is the clear, consistent, collaborative communication. So if we at the table are all starting to say the same thing, and we say it to enough people, then that's one way to do it. If we're consistently growing product out there that is of a certain caliber, that's another one. If we're doing it collaboratively, where it's like, I don't have enough broccoli, but, Farmer Joe does or whatever, then that starts to do it. But then the one that I find, I was born and raised in Toledo, and one of the things that I noticed, and this is how many of you are from Toledo, or from the region? So Toledo tends to be very vertically integrated or siloed. So it's the communication, like how do we communicate not just among the coffee shops or among the restaurants or between all of us as local farmers, but how do we communicate collectively and instead of this way, how do we communicate this way?
Yeah, because if we move across this barrier, so of course you're going to fill your orders first for Pasture Day, direct to consumer, to get the most money you can. But let's just say that makes up for 70% of your flop, 70% of your production. So you don't want to take that 30% and have some good loss. So by doing the additional communication with the 3 other people in town that do Pasture Eggs, and even in your part of town, you guys can take that product and come at it in the same way. And this is why, again, I'm so excited to be here, talk to someone like PK who's going to point out the little gaps that we have in our food system, and then talk about collaboration to see how we can actually creatively meet those gaps. Because yeah, you're not even going to get, even if you get $1.75 for those, which is atrocious, it's a lot better than zero. Or
Tax dollars might be better if they donate.
that's true. But what farmer makes enough money to write the tax? No.
somebody who has a real job because the farm doesn't support his family.
Perfect. University Church Garden is a nonprofit, so bring me your eggs. Yeah, but that's kind of the idea that we have, and even that communication right there that we have. I have extra eggs now. Oh, I can give you a tax write-off, no sweat.
But that's where you have to really have that kind of moment with yourself, that conversation. Is this a hobby? Is this a business?
And
What is, pardon me?
that's exactly kind of the conversation we're having. I'm trying to piece together how do we not make this a hobby?
Because it is a hobby, but how do you make that gap? Because the hobby doesn't support a house full of kids.
So I would say, like, when I was teaching the Urban Ag program at Owens, I had Kurt Bench come in. Because I look at him, and I love having conversations with people around food. So one of the most interesting people I talked to, I had to really like mentally get myself there. But this was 8 years ago maybe. And this woman named Dorothy, she owns maybe 22 McDonald's restaurants in the Phoenix area. She's got it down to a science. She does it really well. And so I had this conversation with her, like, how can you do that? You say you're committed to this. But she's like, well, I run this because it's business, and I do really, really well. But now because I've figured out what the gap is of like, I want to be this philanthropist. I do really well in business, and now I'm able to give a lot of money away to charity. So then it's like, suddenly I had Kurt Bench come in and say, he's working for Cargill. What are you going to do? And he's like, yeah, I am. I'm working for Big Ag. The very thing that I don't want to be doing. But he did it as a means to an end to get to the point where now he's doing a CSA full time. So it's talking with those resources. How do I get there? And seeing, and that's that multiplier effect. That's the absolute beauty of it. Is having him talk to people where it's like, you know what, there's nothing wrong with going to work or having a day job, but there's no shame in that. The shame is you don't talk to other people and figure out what that gap is, and instead say, well, I don't know how to do it. If you're really committed to it, that's where
you're already here. First step down the rabbit hole.
Right. And that's where the metrics come into play. You have to know what that gap is.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing. I didn't want to know. So I have an MBA, and I'm like, Like, I didn't want to know the gap. So when I was in school at the time, I did not want to know. And that's when I finally came to a place where I was like, okay, I'm willing to have that conversation. I'm never going to make this a business. I don't have in me to do that because for me, that's not what I want to do. What I really passionately want to do is do something where I could profoundly impact my community. And that just wasn't doing it for me personally. So it's like, and my goal is, on the one hand, I don't want to burst your bubble. On the other hand, kind of do if it gets you where you want to go. So, if that's helpful, talk to people who have done this and go find out what that gap is. And it's hard work. It's really hard work. Of the 9 companies I've started, I'd say at least 7 of them didn't work out so well. And so it is to be an entrepreneur. It's kind of like with your crops. Let's say you plant broccoli, that's just not going to work so well. With eggs, maybe that's the thing that's going to work for you. Trying it out. Part of it is what I talk to, and I tell the artists and the food people and the tech startups, you have to look at this as kind of experimental entrepreneurship. So you got to look at this like be willing to be a scientist about what it is that's what you need to do to make your passion thrive. And be willing to fail, knowing that for every time that you fail, and you're willing to see what those lessons learned, that's going to get you ever closer, ever faster to where you want to go.
I'd like to make a supportive statement to what you said earlier. You talked about the children in California, you found out what was in the food. And you found out, you looked around you and you found the learning disabilities and the bipolar and everything else. I taught special educators for years. I can tell you, I saw the increase in the children. I taught behavior disorders and learning disabilities.
Yeah.
I've seen it. What you're doing right now can change this. These children are being poisoned. Our children are being poisoned. And the only way we're going to stop that is by feeding them the right food. Everything we're doing is making a difference. Not just money-wise, in the way we live. It's important. It's important.
That's a great point. So when you look at, again, that multiplier effect, there's a guy named Ken Meter, and if you want to get like volumes of really cool information, Ken Meter is a great guy. I think it's CRC, Crossroads Research Center. He lives in like Wisconsin or somewhere, Minnesota or Wisconsin. And he studies local food systems. And one of the like 27 communities that he studied was Northwest Ohio. There's tons of good information that was done in like 2010 or 11. But one of the things that he found out was and this information, like no one knows this, and it's astounding to me. But it's all of us. So we probably all support the farmers market, go to local farmers markets. If all of us went to the farmers market and spent $5 a week, which I know for me is like nothing. I do that on a cup of coffee and something to eat, let alone all the other stuff I buy. But if all of us in our community did that, what do you think that would provide?
$345 million.
You know that? That's not fair.
That was in the intro.
Except Scott. Okay, good. So, all right, so you guys probably already do that. But why don't more people know that? That's something that is like these tomatoes are really awesome. That's something that gets people to stand up and pay attention. That's a crazy number for a community our size.
That's
It's a crazy number.
of new income, of new
Of
money
new
coming in.
income coming into our region. That is a huge number.
Yeah.
So that's where I talk about the communication. So if you do that multiplier effect of like what is that all of us collectively produce and start getting that out there, and then you look at this is a tiny blip, a tiny like snowflake in terms of the glacier of people in our community who are doing cool things. So if we start to rally that around, that's where you start to see really interesting numbers. And then you start talking about it, and we all start saying the same thing. That's where it gets really interesting. And suddenly, those 3 people commenting will be 30 people commenting, will be 500 people commenting, will be 2,000, and so on and so forth.
What I love about the first day that we're sharing is that we're talking about building out from the strengths. In the nonprofit world and community development, most of the work that is done according to meeting a need. But instead of doing that, really successful places look at the assets that are there,
Right.
like
What's the
building
resources?
blocks, the points that are already in the neighborhood, in the community, and then you build out from there. And when I was working in the Old South End, we would measure things like, okay, 70-20 over on Western actually has a garden hose, so that's an asset. We went around and did visible checks, and then we knocked on doors and brought people together to actually have a pretty successful garden for 2 years. Forget about that part. But that's the same idea of what we're trying to build off of here. That the 7% tipping point, the 7% tipping point, that's just the foot in the door,
Right.
And that's the beginning of the momentum. And Toledo and Northwest Ohio is fantastic because our economy is so garbage right now that there's very little to actually hinder a new idea from coming to fruition. Because land is, I will get you free land. I can get you free land.
We have so many resources. We have way more resources than any one of us has any idea about.
Yeah.
Land, money. So this is just kind of building on what you just shared, Scott. Well, this is something that I was kind of like regularly when I was working at UT. I would get the entrepreneurs who would come to me and sit in my office and say, I have this idea. And, some of them were like, okay, you might want to rethink that. But there were a lot of them that were really cool ideas, like potentially game changers in whatever their particular industry is. But I would regularly hear, I've got everything I need. Can you just give me funding? And that's when I'd get to, okay, have a seat. Because, I've got the business plan, I've done the business plan, I've done all the market research. I'm like, okay, so that's when I get into the conversation about the market research is completely irrelevant to what you're doing. And here's why. If you have an idea and you have talked to hundreds of people and it is well thought out and you can articulate, I've talked to this many people, this is where I thought I was. Lessons learned are, I thought I should be selling to restaurants, but really I need to be selling to grocery stores, whatever that is. From an investor standpoint, they love that because you have been willing to do the work ahead of time instead of, well, the market research shows that, 65% of the time it works 35% of the time, or whatever, the stuff that's completely made up, right? So if you can go in and show that you're front-loading this and you've done this work, It's extremely compelling, and we have way more money here than we have any idea. So, who's heard of the Andersons? Okay, that's a trick question. Who's heard of Mommy Ventures? Besides Elder. So Mommy Ventures is the in-house venture fund of the Andersons, and they have $5 million to give away to companies, and they have had the worst time giving it away. And it's to companies anywhere in the country. But I mean, so there's how many people know that? I mean, there's that. So people say, "Oh, well, there's no funding here," and I'm like, I'm going to play the. Oh, I can't say it on the phone. I'm going to play the DS card on this one.
You're
and
good.
say what? Okay. But I'm going to play the DS card and say you just haven't done your homework. Because if you had, you would know that there's all this funding out there, and you just haven't made a compelling argument enough. Compelling enough argument about your business model, like you just haven't done the homework. You haven't done the work. So go do the work, which is what you're all doing now, and you're doing good work. So now I'm saying create a business model that supports the passion that you have and lines that up with how do you do this in a way that, you know, whether you want to make a difference or make money, how you monetize that. That's what you want to shore that up and figure out where that gap is and then start to address that. LJ.
There's no
Yeah.
thing about the ventures for local farmers.
It's mostly agricultural, but so that's actually funny because I'm looking at going to them with the food collaborative, but like if you're doing something that changes a system, how do you do that and get funding for that? So yeah, so they're doing agricultural stuff. While it may not be farming per se, I mean, listen, if they can't give away their money, what are they going to do? They're not just going to shut down the funds. They're going to expand it, right? So my point being, there is money out there, but sometimes you got to get creative and clever about it, and start to figure out what's it worth to you? What do you want to do to make it happen? I'll send you the business model canvas if it's helpful.